Have you ever read a sci-fi epic, one of those massive, sprawling space operas, and thought to yourself, this feels just a little too real?
Oh, yeah. Like the dude under the character's fingernails isn't just made up.
Exactly. Like the bureaucratic nightmares they face, or just the sheer political decay on the page isn't just some clever world building. It's something the author actually survives.
It creates this really fascinating, almost uncanny valley of fiction. You're reading about starships and alien factions, but the dystopia feels less like pure imagination and much more like a thinly veiled memoir.
Right, right. And welcome to today's deep dive, because that is exactly what we're unpacking today. Our stack of sources is, frankly, it's staggering.
It's huge.
Yeah, we are looking at draft chapters, personal notes, and these structural outlines for a massive 300,000-word sci-fi manuscript.
Which is just a monumental undertaking. And, the mission for our deep dive today is to really decode the strategic plan behind all of this. We're looking for what the author calls the red lines of truth.
The red lines.
Yeah.
Hidden right beneath that massive sci-fi veneer.
Exactly. We're going to explore how he translates this incredibly gritty, harsh, real-world life. Surviving collapse of a nation, surviving war, addiction into this epic galactic narrative.
So the best way I can describe his creative strategy here is that this memoir basically acts like a funhouse mirror. Those mirrors work, right?
Where they distort the literal shapes of things.
Right. So real-world countries get mutated into these warring planets, and like a frustrating trip to a pet store gets warped into dealing with this authoritarian symbiote authority.
Oh, I love that part.
Yeah, the shapes are distorted, but by doing that, the mirror actually reflects the emotional truth of his life far more accurately than, say, a standard chronological autobiography ever could.
Well, and that's the brilliance of the sci-fi framing, really. Because if you write a straight memoir about war and trauma, people, they often put their guards up.
Oh, for sure. It's too heavy.
Right. But you wrap it in a space opera, and suddenly you give yourself permission to be brutally honest. And you give the reader a way to actually digest that trauma.
Makes total sense.
But to understand this narrator's journey across the galaxy, we first have to explore the so-called cursed world he comes from. So in the book, it's a planet called Modrian.
Modrian.
Yeah.
And looking at his historical notes, Modrian is a very clear, super deliberate stand-in for the author's native Yugoslavia.
Precisely. So in the universe of the book, Modrian sits as this tense geopolitical buffer zone. It's squeezed between two massive superpowers.
Classic rock in a hard place.
Exactly. To the west, you have the Western Star Dominion, and they preach freedom, but in reality, they tighten these invisible, suffocating economic chains.
Right.
And then to the east, you have the Iron Collective, which promises absolute unity but totally crushes any dissenting voices under its ideology. Modrian is the pressure valve caught right in the middle.
But, what does it actually feel like to be a kid growing up on a pressure valve? Because this is where that funhouse mirror shows us a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, a huge paradox.
Outsiders looking into real-world Yugoslavia during that dictatorship saw exactly what you'd expect. Brutalist gray concrete buildings, the fear of the secret police, just complete rigidity.
Yeah.
But the author's lived experience, he calls it a hard country with a soft heart.
Which is such a crucial theme in his life and the book. He notes that while the political system at the top was completely cold and unforgiving, the actual base of society was deeply, almost aggressively warm.
Aggressively warm. I like that.
Yeah. He writes about how doors were literally always open. People shared cheap wine in the public parks, neighbors sang songs together. The people in your apartment block were essentially extended family.
Right, because they had to be.
Exactly. The authoritarian system tolerated absolutely everything except criticism of the party. But outside of that narrow political restriction, there was this profound, thriving sense of human connection.
Okay, but let me stop you there for a second. Because when I read that in the notes, a massive red flag went up for me.
Oh.
How so?
Well, is he romanticizing a dictatorship? Because that seems like a really dangerous line to walk, especially right now in a world where authoritarianism is kind of making a comeback.
No, it's a completely fair question. And the author actually anticipates it in his outlines. He explicitly acknowledges that the regime was a prison without walls.
Okay, so he's not ignoring the bad stuff.
Not at all. He doesn't deny the oppression, the disappearances, the fear, but he separates the regime from the people. What he's mourning isn't the government. He's mourning the loss of community.
Got it.
He's mourning a time when humans genuinely relied on each other to survive beneath that iron grip, which,
Okay.
is a stark contrast to the profound isolation he feels later on in the modern, quote-unquote, free world.
Wow, yeah. And that actually brings up a literary warning he includes that it just gutted me. He talks about reading 2 old books as a kid, and the notes strongly imply they are Animal Farm and 1984. Yes, right. He refers to them as the relics from the writer long dead.
Exactly. And he says that as a cynical teenager, he related to Benjamin. The character, the knowing, stubborn donkey who just watches the farm fall apart with tired eyes.
Right, Benjamin understands too much but says too little.
Exactly. The author thought, that's me, I'm the smart observer. But then he says life just ground him down. He grew older, the buffer world collapsed, and he suddenly realized he wasn't the wise donkey anymore.
He was Boxer.
He had become Boxer, the horse, the loyal worker, just pushing himself until his body gave out, saying, I will work harder, working until he literally bled without even noticing it.
It's just a devastating psychological realization. I mean, you start life thinking you're the wise observer sitting above the fray, only to realize the system has been using you as a workhorse the entire time.
Yeah.
And that warm childhood on the buffer world, it was just an illusion. And illusions shatter. In the narrative, the physical shattering happens when the buffer world collapses into the Modran War.
And you would think escaping the literal meat grinder of a dying country would be the whole focus of the story, right? I mean, the real world equivalent here is the brutal collapse of Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
But the way he describes this war, it completely strips away every Hollywood trope we have.
Oh, entirely. He was drafted as a medic, right?
Yeah, as a medic. The absurdity of his experience is just wild.
He heavily emphasizes the sheer hypocrisy of the whole conflict. He points out that every single faction, every single army broadcast the exact same narrative to their soldiers. We are defending our homes?
But they weren't, were they?
Well, he noticed very quickly that the people who actually had the most to protect the wealthy, the politically connected, they were never in the trenches. They were hiding out in the West.
In the sci-fi equivalents of Munich or Switzerland.
Right. They were protecting their property from a safe distance while teenagers with absolutely nothing fought and died in the mud.
Yeah, and there's this one anecdote from his notes that I literally had to read it 3 times just to make sure I understood it. It's so darkly hilarious.
The bar story.
Yes. He's sitting in a bar on the Outer Belt, and he admits to a stranger that he actually fought for all 3 armies in the war.
Which, in the real world, would be the Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian forces.
Right. And I'm just reading this thinking, wait, how did someone even survive fighting for 3 opposing armies? That sounds like a fast track to a firing squad.
He calls himself the flexible patriot.
The flexible patriot. It's so good.
It really just comes down to the complete chaotic breakdown of society. When a country fractures that violently, borders and allegiances shift by the hour. You get conscripted, you get captured, assimilated, or you just, put on whatever uniform keeps you from getting shot that day.
It's insane. And the stranger in the bar is understandably shocked. He's like, you fought for all 3.
Yep.
And the author says yes. And the kicker is he plans to collect retirement pensions from all 3 governments.
It's brilliant.
He tells the guy, I bled for all 3 of them. If they have a problem with it, they can fight each other over who gets to pay me. It's just such a perfect use of dark humor to show how utterly meaningless the official flags and rhetoric became to the people actually bleeding on the ground.
It completely dismantles romantic nationalism. And to further illustrate the psychological decay of his home world during this time, he outlines his connection to this underground satirical comic book called the TNT Syndicate.
Oh, I wanted to dig into this because the comic was about a highly dysfunctional spy agency operating out of a dilapidated flower shop, right?
Exactly. And for the author and his entire generation, this comic perfectly mirrored their collapsing country.
Yeah, he says he literally mutated through the archetypes of this comic book as he aged through the war. So first, he was Alan Ford.
Right. Alan Ford is the naive, handsome youth. He's completely blind to the fact that the system is exploiting him. He misses opportunities because he's just too oblivious and, frankly, hopeful.
But then the war hits. The trenches happen, and that hope just gets burned right out of him. He mutates into Bob Rock.
The angry guy.
Yeah, Bob Rock is the cynical, raging, short-fused frontline worker. He does all the dangerous, dirty field work for absolute pennies while the high command hoards all the wealth.
And finally, after the war, he settles into the chief, the grumpy, completely isolated old man who just wants to stay in his own space, lock the door, and basically never be bothered by the world ever again.
It's presented as this funny comic book reference, but structurally, it is a tragic roadmap of a human life adapting to sustained chaos.
It really is.
Reading his accounts of the war, surviving 3 armies, mutating into this isolated chief, dodging artillery in a Kendit, I honestly couldn't help but think of Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. Okay, that's an interesting connection. Walk me through that.
Well, think about how the internet today loves to romanticize war. There's this hyper-masculine, tactical cosplay culture that treats combat like it's this arena for elite skill and macho heroism.
Oh, sure, the whole alpha warrior mindset.
Exactly. But the author completely dismantles that myth. He says he survived the Modrian War, not through elite sniper skills or tactical brilliance, but through sheer, unadulterated dumb luck.
Just wandering through the chaos.
Yeah. He describes stumbling through the smoke, moving when he was supposed to stay still, standing frozen when he should have run for cover. And somehow, by some cosmic glitch, the artillery shells just missed him. It's Forrest Gump in a war zone, surviving by accident, not by being a super soldier.
That's a really accurate synthesis. He strips all the manufactured glory right out of survival. And eventually, having survived the physical destruction of his home world, the narrator has to flee. He physically escapes to the Western Star Dominion.
The wealthy, glittering, supposedly free empire of the West.
Right, but physical escape doesn't erase psychological programming. Paradise has teeth.
It really does. Because you'd think getting to the glittering West would be the triumphant happy ending. But instead, he arrives in the West and falls into a completely different kind of trap. Addiction.
Yeah. In the sci-fi narrative, he describes a designer drug in the Dominion called Suma. It's an engineered marvel. When you take it, it makes you feel like a god, brilliant, articulate, invincible.
But the crash is brutal.
Oh, terrible. When it fades, it hollows you out, leaving you as this crawling shadow. But what's crucial here isn't just the drug itself, it's the underlying mechanism of why he was so vulnerable to it.
He calls it the curse of surplus. And I want you listening to think about your own habits for a second. If you were dropped into an environment where your coping mechanisms were suddenly unlimited, incredibly cheap, and just everywhere,
Yeah.
how long would it take for that surplus to become a trap?
Exactly. He notes that coming from a culture of absolute scarcity on Modrian, he was uniquely primed to fall apart in the West.
Right, because back home, heavy drinking wasn't seen as a warning sign of trauma. It was just tradition. It was, quote, part of becoming a man.
He says he didn't fall into addiction. He walked into it because it felt like the most familiar room in the house.
Man, that's powerful.
It's a profound observation on how survival mechanisms from a hard world translate terribly into a world of hyperabundance. When you are wired for scarcity, surplus destroys you.
Yeah.
And this personal internal collapse leads directly into his broader socio-political philosophy regarding the external collapse of the Western Star Dominion itself. He calls this structural decay the inverted pyramid.
Okay, let's unpack the inverted pyramid, because this is where his sci-fi world building hits incredibly close to our actual current reality.
Yeah.
Explain the mechanics of this pyramid to me.
So historically, he argues, the pyramid of information and power flowed top down. The elites, the media, the gatekeepers at the narrow top of the pyramid, they told the wide base of the masses what reality was.
Right.
It was a structure built on control, obedience, and largely silence from the bottom.
But then technology flips the pyramid upside down. Suddenly you have billions of smartphones, billions of cameras, billions of voices.
The wide base is now at the top.
Exactly. The massive crowd is generating this deafening, algorithmic ocean of noise, and the former gatekeepers are now crushed at the bottom, terrified, just scrambling to control a narrative that has completely escaped them. The algorithms reward the loudest, most extreme voices, creating a society that is constantly screaming at itself.
And it's a brutal critique of our modern digital landscape. And, for you listening, it's worth noting here that our goal isn't to agree or disagree with his politics.
Right. We need to be very clear about that. We are totally impartial here.
Absolutely. We are just looking through his lens, the lens of a guy who survived an actual literal war zone, looking at our modern culture wars and thinking we've all completely lost our minds.
Oh, he absolutely blasts everyone.
Yeah.
In this inverted pyramid, he attacks what he calls the woke right. These young men who sit in climate-controlled bedrooms, romanticizing harsh dictatorships and military regimes.
Oh, the cosplay warriors again?
Exactly. They post about strength and tradition, but the author knows they wouldn't last a week in the actual regimes they're cosplaying.
Because he knows what real oppression feels like, so their performance of strength is just absurd to him. But on the other side, he heavily critiques salon leftists, and certain activist factions.
Right. He doesn't spare them either.
Not at all. He views them as insulated cultural elites who use people from his background, immigrants escaping the buffer worlds, as convenient theoretical scapegoats for their own political arguments, all while preaching a revolution they themselves could never actually endure.
He describes himself as a man without a flag, standing in a no-man's sector. He actually calls the modern West a kindergarten with nuclear weapons. Why use that specific, terrifying phrase?
Well, because he sees a tragic, really dangerous irony. The West is a civilization that historically survived world wars, plagues, and actual systemic collapse. Yet he looks around today and sees it seemingly collapsing over, quote, hurt feelings and algorithmically generated outrage.
A kindergarten.
Right. He views it as a society run by an assembly line of fools.
Yeah.
People who have been so entirely insulated by comfort and surplus that they lack the grit forged by actual hardship. They're fighting over digital illusions while the foundational structures of their civilization rot beneath them.
So if the whole system is a kindergarten with nukes, and he's stuck in this artificial digital dystopia, how does he not just lose his mind? How does he find any tether to reality?
He finds it through two very specific, very grounded connections. In the massive scale of the sci-fi universe, his anchors are incredibly intimate. The first is a creature called a Void Lynx.
Yes, her name is Ash. And here's where that funhouse mirror analogy comes back brilliantly. The real-world origin of this sci-fi symbiote is just wonderful. It's a stray kitten that he rescued from a bureaucratic nightmare at a PetSmart.
It's so good. He translates the mundane annoyance of filling out adoption paperwork at a pet store into the dystopian symbiote authority.
I've definitely felt like I was at the symbiote authority filling out forms before.
Right. He describes a system where acquiring a companion requires endless forms, background checks, and maintaining a high social reliability index. In the story, he walks out of the facility in disgust and finds a sanctuary of stray echoes instead.
It perfectly captures how alienating modern bureaucracy feels. And at this sanctuary, this tiny gray blur of a kitten chooses him. He says she broke the sound barrier just to claim his leg.
Wow.
Yeah. In the sci-fi world, she acts as a literal mental symbiote. When she anchors herself to his armor, she slows time, she mutes his physical pain, and she sends him a single, simple feeling across their neural link. I am here. Keep going.
It's a beautiful survival mechanism. She isn't there to fight his wars or fix the inverted pyramid. She is there to anchor his mind when the noise gets too loud. And the second anchor is even deeper. It's what he calls the foundation stone, the legacy of his father.
Right. His father was a chief of police in the real world. In the book, he translates him into a high prefect in a deeply corrupt federation on the Old Rim.
And in a system where literally every official took bribes just to approve transit passes and cargo manifests, his father refused to take a single credit. He told his son that the exact moment you take their credits, they own your biometrics. They own your future.
He didn't leave his family a massive estate or hidden wealth. He left them a name that was never for sale and a spine that never bent. And, I had to stop and just think about that for a while.
That's a heavy thought.
It is. Because for all of the author's rugged cynicism, and he is deeply cynical, he admits to fighting in internet comment sections. He dismisses entire modern political movements. He is completely, utterly disarmed by a stray kitten and the memory of his father's integrity.
It proves his ultimate point, doesn't it?
It really does. Look at the human, or the animal, not the label. The Funhouse Mirror shows us that trauma and anger might make you put up massive planetary-scale walls, but true integrity and genuine, simple connection can still cut right through them.
If we distill this entire deep dive, this 300,000-word manuscript isn't just a space opera. It is a strategic survival manual.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It's a manual for enduring the collapse of two entirely different worlds, one that was violently destroyed by artillery and scarcity, and another that is currently decaying from the inside out through excess comfort, surplus, and digital noise.
It really makes you think about your own life. As you listen to this, think about what grounds you. When the world feels like a noisy, inverted pyramid full of digital static and people cosplaying strength, what is your Void Lynx? What is the foundation stone that keeps your spine from bending?
Because ultimately, knowing what grounds you is the only defense mechanism that actually works when the institutions around you start to fail.
Absolutely. Well, I want to leave you with the author's ultimate sci-fi punchline, just a thought to ponder after we sign off. As a kid reading sci-fi in a buffer world, he was promised a future of flying cars, holodecks, and glittering colonies on Mars.
The classic sci-fi dream.
Right? Instead, the future actually arrived, and what did we get? We got a rectangular device in our pockets that tracks our biological data, monitors our habits, and allows us to endlessly argue with strangers in a digital void. If this is the future we were promised, do we want a refund? Or are we going to figure out how to build something real in the ruins?